We buried my daughter on a Thursday under a sky that couldn't decide whether to rain or make a liar out of the forecast. The lilies hadn't even wilted when my son-in-law decided to speak for the house, as if it had ever loved him back. He waited until the mourners were gone and the casserole dishes were stacked like bricks on the counter, then told me I had 30 days to leave. Before we continue, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell icon, so you never miss a story like this one. He didn't shout. Derek never wasted volume when he could draw blood with a calm tone. "It's not personal, Luke," he said, unfolding a napkin he had no intention of using. "This place is too heavy with memories. I need a fresh start." "A fresh start," I repeated, tasting the words like a bad pill. The guest chairs still wore black ribbons from the service. The wind chime Emily bought in college, blue glass, a chipped anchor, breathed from the back porch like the house itself was trying to speak up on my behalf. Derek leaned on the island as if he'd built it. He hadn't. I'd picked that maple slab 15 years ago when Emily wanted something warm but clean, her words. I sanded it until it held a shine you could set a glass on without coasters. "I'll help you look at places," he continued. "There's a retirement complex off Alder. Elevator, community room. It'll be simpler." Simpler. I tightened my fingers around Emily's memorial program, the cardstock gone soft from a day of being clutched. "And where does my daughter's father live until then?" I asked. "I suppose simpler means someone else's problem." He tilted his head, performing empathy like a speech he'd practiced in the mirror. "You're strong. You'll figure it out." His eyes slid to the sink where 2 wine glasses were drying. One had a lipstick crescent I knew wasn't Emily's shade. It hadn't been her shade for months, and it would never be again. He followed my gaze. "Rosa brought a casserole earlier," he said quickly, like the name could act as solvent. "Not our neighbor's Rosa. Hers is a spicy green salsa, and gossip nobody can resist. This was a different Rosa, the made-up kind. I didn't bother calling him on it. I could hear the soft ping of a phone on the hall table, the screen lighting up with a message preview. "See. You okay?" I saved the stopping place. He flinched and turned the device face down. "You ever notice," I said, "how grief makes a house echo? You say something cruel and it ricochets around until even the pictures hear it." Derek's smile was small and managerial. "We all handle pain differently." "You handle it with a toothbrush?" I glanced toward the upstairs hall. New charcoal bristles peered from the cup by the sink I'd kept in the guest bath, empty for company. "And spare clothes stuffed in the hall cabinet, and someone else's. Perfume riding the heat vent." He straightened, all pretend kindness gone. "I'm asking you to be reasonable." "So am I," I said. "Wait until the weekends to strip her name out of the rooms." He sighed like he'd been patient for years. "Emily wouldn't want us stuck." He used my daughter's name like a passcode. People do that when they're trying to open doors that aren't theirs. The lilies in the foyer surrendered and drooped. My knees felt older than 62. I set the program down and reached for the kettle because grief has a way of sending you towards small rituals. Boil water, find the lemon, pretend the steam can fill the hollow. Derek moved faster, as if the kitchen belonged to his choreography now. "I'll put a list together," he said. "Assisted living, senior apartments, something safe." "Safe?" I echoed. "Like a padded room for a man who refuses to break." He blinked, not sure if I'd insulted him or myself. "I'm trying to help." "No," I said, and I surprised myself with how steady it came out. "You're trying to erase evidence. There's a difference." For a moment, something honest showed under his careful face. Not remorse, calculation. He'd already made decisions while I was at the cemetery, talking to people who knew how brave Emily had been when the hair went, and the fingernails turned pale and the pain came on like weather. He'd spent that time measuring rooms with his eyes, seeing where a queen bed might fit, imagining laughter that wasn't ours. He was already on the other side of the river, waving for me to swim alone. I poured the water and watched the lemon wheel swirl. The ceramic mug read, Best dad. Emily had bought it when I taught her to drive a stick in a parking lot behind the grocery store, and she stalled so hard we both laughed until we cried. I could hear those laughs now, faint but intact, like the sound was stored in the walls. 30 days, he said again, firmer. I'll cover your first month's rent wherever you end up. I'm not a monster, Luke. Monsters rarely are in their own heads. I lifted the mug and felt the heat wake nerves in my palm. Where do you go? I asked, when the place you built your life around refuses your name. He looked puzzled. Derek isn't good with sentences that don't add columns for him. I don't follow. You will, I said. He left me in the kitchen with the wind chime scraping its soft little song. I listened to his footsteps climb the stairs. A closet door, a dresser drawer, the zipped whisper of a garment bag swallowing what it could. The house had a way of reminding you who really lived there. If you put your palm flat on the banister, you could feel the faint oil where Emily's hand used to trail when she came down for breakfast. In high school, always running late, always adding earrings on the fly and cursing quietly if she dropped the back in the carpet. If you stand in the front bedroom and angle your ear, you can still catch the tiny groan in the floorboard where she used to pace before exams. These aren't metaphors to me, they're coordinates. I carried my tea to the dining room and sat in the chair with the slightly uneven leg, the one I kept meaning to fix just to prove to myself I still could. On the table, beside the unopened sympathy cards and a stack of unused napkins, folded by people too polite to leave without doing something, lay the folder from the hospice. Paperwork with words like estate and personal representative, in fonts too clean for the mess they describe. Derek came down with an armful of picture frames. He didn't meet my eyes. Some of these are probably better in storage, he said. Leave them, I told him. The walls look wrong without her. She's not in the walls, he said. She's gone? I took a breath, set the mug down, and finally asked the only question that mattered. Who told you this house was yours to manage? His head cocked. Emily and I. No, I said quietly, but with something in it that made him stop. That's not the answer I asked for. I let the silence sit, long enough that he had to either back away or fill it with a lie. He chose the lie. We talked. We made plans. You know. I knew. I knew how people talk when they're broke on courage and rich on denial. I knew Derek's paycheck, and I knew the mortgage, because I have eyes and a tape measure and a memory for numbers that paid my bills, long before I learned to enjoy sanding a beam, until the grain felt like satin. I knew the roof schedule and the tax schedule and the insurance premium schedule, because I'm the kind of man who keeps schedules, and because the house talks to men like me if you let it. This place, I said, tracing a water ring on the table, doesn't belong to Pride. Are you threatening me? He asked too fast. No, I said. I'm promising myself. A car pulled up out front, a friend of Emily's dropping off a dish and a hug. I stood, thanked her at the door, accepted the warmth of someone who knew my girl when she was 11 and playing trumpet badly in a school gym that smelled like pennies. When I turned back, Derek had moved the family portrait from the mantel and placed it face down on the end table. He'd left smudges on the glass. I'll start sorting things tomorrow, he said. You'll start by asking, I corrected. We'll go room by room. You and I will decide together what moves and what doesn't. He laughed then, a short, clean sound like the lid on a metal can. You don't decide anything here anymore, Luke. You're a guest. Am I? I let the words sit there between us, harmless as a pebble until you notice it lodged in the tread of your shoe, the one that eventually makes you trip at a bad moment. Then be a better host. His jaw moved like he was chewing what to say next. This is happening, he said. Don't make it harder than it has to be. I wanted to tell him that Hard had already arrived in a hospital room at 2 a.m. on a Monday when the nurse in pale sneakers touched my elbow and asked if I wanted a minute alone. I wanted to say that there wasn't a scale invented heavy enough to compare this conversation to the weight of my daughter's hand going slack in mine. But men like Derek don't have shelves for those measurements. They index the world with bullet points and action items and believe grief can be put on hold for logistics. Go sleep, I told him. You look tired, he sniffed, and you look stubborn. Some of us earned our adjectives, I said. He went upstairs again, shoes loud on the steps. I sat until the tea cooled, and the room took on that end-of-day quiet, where a house decides which sounds to keep and which to let go. Outside, a bus sighed at the corner. Somewhere, a dog barked at nothing. I pressed my thumb on the rough edge of the table's water ring, and then, finally, stood. Emily's room still smelled a little like her shampoo, even after months of doors half closed, and windows cracked to let the Oregon rain taste the sill. She'd asked me, near the end, to keep the light bedding on year-round so it wouldn't look like winter in her head. I'd done it, even when the nights ran colder than I liked. I turned on the lamp by her desk, and the bulb hummed. The bulletin board still wore a ticket stub from a concert she dragged me to because she needed an excuse to be near teenagers without admitting she did. I knelt by the bottom dresser drawer and slid it out. The back panels still had my pencil X where I'd marked the studs. When I built the thing the year she turned 20 and moved into this room for good, after who knows how many apartment leases and 2 loud neighbors. Behind the panel was a shallow void, the kind every old carpenter leaves behind, because we understand the future. Finds uses we can't name yet. I pressed my fingers into the seam until the wood gave like a held breath. The envelope was where I'd left it, 5 years and a lifetime ago. Heavy cream paper, no return address. My name printed in the old typewriter font I'd always preferred. Beneath it, a key in a small plastic bag, the teeth of it cut in a pattern you don't forget once you've turned it 100 times in weather and in a hurry. I set both on the bedspread and listened to my pulse fall into a tempo that had nothing to do with fear. Downstairs, a phone chimed again. C. Call me when you can. I folded the envelope into my palm until it left a dent, not because I needed the artifact to be real, but because men like Derek only believe in things that press back. I don't pray as often as I used to, but I closed my eyes and said Emily's name like a vow. Then I slid the panel back into place, stood up slow, with the ache you get when a body has spent all day being brave, and turned off the light. On the way to my room, I paused at the top of the stairs and looked down at the dark square of the front door, at the outline of a house that had seen our best and worst, and still stood square on its foundation. 30 days, I whispered, not to Derek, not even to myself, but to the stubborn part of love that insists on boundaries. The wind chime sang once, just once, as if it had heard me. The first nights after a funeral carry a silence you don't prepare for. The phones stop ringing, the visitors stop knocking, and suddenly grief has the whole house to itself. I sat in Emily's room with the door half closed, watching the shadows move across the ceiling like slow waves. Derek's footsteps paced downstairs, steady and selfish, as if his loss weighed less than mine. I kept hearing the sound of Emily's laugh echoing through those hospital corridors. She'd been so sick near the end, yet she'd still find jokes to throw at me when I looked too worried. "Dad, don't hover," she'd whisper when I leaned over to adjust her blanket. "You'll ruin your handyman reputation. People will think you fix beds instead of faucets." That was Emily, brave even when the disease had hollowed her cheeks and taken the shine from her eyes. For 8 months I'd lived in that sterile world of beeping monitors and antiseptic smells, while Derek had treated the hospital like an inconvenience. He'd complain about parking fees, about gas, about missing football games. Once, he even said, "Can't you just visit on weekends, Luke? You're wasting time." Wasting time? He said that while my daughter was dying. The memory burned hotter than the coffee mug I was gripping. I remembered nights when Emily would ask for water, and Derek would sigh like she'd asked him to rebuild the house. He'd slide into a chair, scroll through his phone and tell her she was tough enough to wait. But she never had to wait with me. I'd bring the water before she finished asking. I'd hold the straw while she sipped, patient as she caught her breath. When you watch someone you love fade day by day, you start measuring the world differently. Every sigh, every kind word, every small cruelty, each one becomes a monument. Derek had built a mountain of cruelty, and now he was standing on top of it, pretending to be the master of my daughter's legacy. I looked at the hospice papers spread across the desk. Emily had underlined a line in her own handwriting. Dad, promise me you'll never let anyone erase me. She wrote that in her journal a week before she slipped into her final sleep. Derek would never understand what those words meant. To him, memories were clutter to be swept out for the next chapter. To me, they were sacred ground. I closed the journal carefully, my hands trembling more from rage than age. Downstairs, a door slammed. Derek was on the phone again, his voice rising in that fake professional tone he used whenever he wanted to sound important. I caught fragments: appraisal, listing, new start. The man hadn't even waited a week before plotting. He didn't know that Emily had whispered her fears to me late one night while Derek snored in the chair beside her. Dad, she said, her voice dry as paper, I'm scared he won't know how to grieve. I'm scared he'll fill the silence with someone else before he's even heard mine. Her fear had been right. Derek had been texting another woman even while chemotherapy dripped into her veins. I'd seen the smirk, the quick thumbs on the phone, the way he'd step out into the hall and come back smelling of cheap cologne. I clenched my fists and breathed through the anger. My father used to tell me, rage is just wasted energy if you don't turn it into action. I wasn't ready to act yet, but the fire was building. I stood at Emily's window and looked out at the quiet street. Rosa Alvarez from next door was out front watering her roses, even though the hour was late. She looked up, caught my eye, and raised a hand. Her face softened, the way good neighbors do when they see grief walking around in the skin of someone they know. I nodded back, thankful for even that silent kindness. Behind me, the room still smelled faintly of Emily's shampoo. I sat on her bed and whispered, I won't let him erase you, Em. Not now, not ever. The wind carried the sound of the chimes from the porch. For a moment, I let myself believe she'd heard me. When I finally lay down, Derek's footsteps crossed the floor again, heavier this time, like he was pacing a prison he thought he owned. He had no idea that in his arrogance, he was laying the first bricks of his own cage. Morning light has a way of showing you what grief hides in the dark. When I walked downstairs, Derek was already in the living room with boxes spread open like open wounds, frames, photo albums, ribbons from school plays, all stacked for disposal. What are you doing? I asked, though the answer was in his hands. Cleaning up, he said. His tone was flat, managerial, like he was conducting inventory at work. We don't need all this clutter. I stepped closer and saw what he meant by clutter. Emily's baby shoes, her first drawing in crayon, the music program from her college recital. A lifetime of breath and heart reduced to cardboard piles. Put them back, I told him. He shook his head. Clara doesn't want old junk around when she moves in. She deserves a home without ghosts. The name hit the air heavy. Clara. No more hidden texts, no more lipstick excuses. He said her name out loud now. My chest tightened, not from surprise, but from the audacity. Emily hadn't been gone 2 weeks, and he was already preparing the stage for someone else. You're throwing away her life? I whispered. She's gone, Luke, he said without looking up. This house belongs to the living now. I bent and pulled a photo album from the box before he could toss it. The pages smelled faintly of glue and dust, carrying birthdays, scraped knees, Emily's first bike ride. I pressed the cover to my chest, as if the photos inside were still warm. Derek watched me with irritation. You can't keep everything. I can keep what matters, I said. He laughed, a short, bitter sound. You're too sentimental. That's why you'll never move forward. I didn't answer. Instead, I took the album upstairs and placed it carefully on Emily's bed. One day, maybe, I'd be strong enough to open it. For now, it was enough to know it hadn't been lost to a dumpster. When I came back down, Derek was outside by the curb, dragging another trash bag toward a rented dumpster parked in the driveway. I followed, the cold air cutting sharper than his words. "Those bags," I demanded. "Old clothes," he said. "Nobody wants them." I pulled one open. Inside lay Emily's scarves, the soft wool ones she knitted when her fingers still had strength. I lifted the blue one, the one she wore the winter she met Derek, and held it like a flag. He rolled his eyes. "Luke, you can't live in the past." "This isn't the past," I said. "This is my daughter." His face hardened. "Correction, she was your daughter. Now she's just memories. And memories don't pay mortgages." For the first time since Emily's funeral, anger rose sharp in my throat. I wanted to shout, to throw his smug words back at him. But I swallowed it. Rage gives men like Derek satisfaction. Silence unsettles them more. As if on cue, a car pulled into the driveway, a sleek silver sedan, unfamiliar. The door opened and Clara stepped out. Tall, polished, dressed as if for brunch instead of condolence. She looked at Derek with a smile too practiced for morning. "You didn't tell me your father-in-law was still here," she said, her voice cool. "He's in transition," Derek replied, shooting me a look meant to remind me of my 30 days. Clara extended a hand with a polite smile. "I'm Clara. You must be Luke." I shook her hand. It was warm, firm, the kind of grip that said she wasn't here for sympathy. She was here for ownership. Inside, Derek walked her through the rooms, talking about paint colors and furniture changes, like the house was already his showroom. I trailed behind silently, noting each word he spoke like a craftsman measuring the angles of a crooked frame. When Clara reached Emily's old room, she wrinkled her nose. "We'll need to redo this. It feels heavy." I felt the photo album upstairs pressing against my memory. "It feels lived in," I corrected. She tilted her head, appraising me like part of the decor. "You're attached to this place." "It's attached to me," I said quietly. Derek quickly ushered her toward the kitchen, talking over me. "We'll replace the counters, maybe open the wall for light." I stood at the bottom of the stairs, hands curling into fists. They were already writing Emily out of her own story, one renovation at a time. They thought I was powerless, a relic to be swept aside. They didn't know that some memories don't fade. They sharpen into weapons. As Clara admired the backyard, Derek leaned toward me with that smug smile. "See? She's already making this place better. You'll thank me when it's done." I met his eyes steady. "This house isn't yours to improve." His smile faltered for a second before returning. "We'll see about that." Yes, I thought, we will. The next morning, I woke to the sound of metal grinding in the backyard. Derek was crouched near the shed, toolbox open, a new padlock gleaming in his hand. My tools, 40 years' worth of work, investment, and pride, were inside. The shed was my workshop, my history, my lifeline. "What are you doing?" I called from the porch. He didn't bother hiding it. "Security," he said, sliding the shackle shut with a click that sounded final. "Too many break-ins lately. Can't be too careful." "That shed is mine," I reminded him, my voice steady. "It's on my property," he shot back, standing tall. "Which makes it mine." I felt something twist inside me. The chisels, the saws, the drills. Every tool had a story, bought with sweat-stained paychecks from my years building homes. Derek hadn't held a hammer long enough to raise a nail, yet he dared to call them his. When I stepped forward, he blocked the path with a smirk. "Don't worry, Luke. I'll keep your little hobby gears safe until you're settled somewhere else." "Hobby?" My voice cracked sharper than I intended. "Those tools built this city. They built this house." But Derek was already walking back toward the kitchen, phone in hand, texting with that smug grin that never left his face. Later that day, I found a sheet of paper folded neatly on the dining room table. Heavy letterhead, ink crisp and official. 30-day notice to vacate. My name filled the blank lines like a curse. Derek had even highlighted the phrase, tenant in possession. I read the words 3 times, letting the insult sink deep. A tenant. That's what he'd reduced me to in the home where Emily had taken her first steps, where I'd tucked her in after nightmares, where I'd fixed every leaky faucet and sagging floorboard. When Derek returned from work, his tie loose, his grin wide, he found me still sitting at the table. "You got the notice?" he asked. I folded it once, twice, slid it back across the polished wood. "Where am I supposed to go?" "There's a retirement complex off Alder," he said smoothly. 2 meals a day, card games in the lounge. Perfect for you. I'll even cover the first month because I'm generous like that." "Generous?" I repeated, each syllable bitter. He leaned closer, smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't his usual brand. "Look, Luke, you've had a good run here, but it's time to face facts. You're old, you're broke, and you don't belong. I have a career. Clara has plans. We can't have a ghost haunting the place." I stared at him, and for a moment he mistook my silence for surrender. He smirked, patted my shoulder as if dismissing a tired employee, and went upstairs humming. But inside, something had shifted. The insult, the eviction, the theft of my tools, each act wasn't just cruelty. It was arrogance, and arrogance blinds men to the traps they build for themselves. That night, I sat in Emily's room again. The photo album I'd rescued from the dumpster lay open on her bed, pages glowing under the lamplight. In one picture, she was 6 years old, holding a hammer almost as big as her arm, laughing as I steadied a plank. "You told me once, Dad," she'd said that day, "if I learn to use tools, I'll never be helpless." She was right, and neither am I. The house went silent after midnight, but I couldn't sleep. Derek's eviction notice still sat on the table downstairs, its sharp black ink carved into my thoughts like a scar. Every word dripped arrogance. Tenant, vacate, 30 days. He thought he'd won. I knew better. I climbed the stairs and stepped into Emily's room, careful not to wake the creaking boards. Her scent still lingered in the quilt she'd wrapped around herself during chemo, faint lavender mixed with antiseptic. It steadied me. I knelt at her dresser. Years ago, I'd built a false panel in the bottom drawer, the kind carpenters leave behind for reasons they can't quite explain. My fingers found the seam, pressed until it released with a soft sigh. Behind the panel lay a thick manila folder bound with twine. My hands trembled as I lifted it. Inside were documents Derek had never seen: bank statements, tax records, deeds, incorporation papers from a time when I wasn't just Luke the handyman. Back then I'd built subdivisions, overseen crews, shaken hands with city planners. I'd learned the value of keeping my name quiet when prideful men wanted all the credit. And I'd learned to store proof where arrogance would never bother to look. One paper caught the light. A warranty deed, signed decades ago with my name written in clear strokes. Derek had called me a tenant. He'd forgotten that houses remember their true owners. I sat on the edge of Emily's bed, reading each page. Mortgage statements showing payments from my account, insurance policies under my name, receipts for every major repair Derek bragged about as his. All filed neatly, all waiting for a day like this. Emily had once teased me for keeping everything. "Dad, you even saved the tags from paint cans." She never understood that paper trails are the bones of a life. Someday they keep the vultures away. I pulled my phone from my pocket and scrolled to a number I hadn't dialed in years. Evelyn Harper, attorney, old friend, sharp as they come. She'd guided me through zoning battles back when my hair was more brown than gray. Her voice answered on the second ring, warm but edged with sleep. "Luke, it's been a while." "Too long," I said. My throat caught, but I pushed forward. "Evelyn, I need your help. Tomorrow." She was quiet for a beat. "This about Derek?" "You've heard." "Rosa Alvarez called me tonight," she admitted. "Said she's worried he's trying to push you out." I told her you're not the type to get cornered. I'm not, I said, looking at the folder in my lap. But it's time I stopped pretending to be. What do you want me to do? Arrange a formal reading at your office tomorrow. Call it a will reading, if you like. Invite Derek, his Clara, and a few neighbors, and Evelyn. Bring the records. Another pause, then a low whistle. Luke, you've been holding back. Not anymore. All right, she said briskly, shifting into lawyer mode. 2:00. I'll make the calls. When I hung up, the silence returned, heavy but no longer suffocating. I placed the folder on the nightstand beside Emily's photo, her smile caught in a frame Derek hadn't noticed yet. Rest easy, Em, I whispered. He thinks I'm helpless. Tomorrow, he learns the truth. The wind rattled the window, carrying the faint sound of Rose's wind chimes across the dark street. It felt like an answer. By morning, Derek strutted around the kitchen like a man already crowned king. He whistled as he scrolled through his phone, Clara's name flashing on the screen in bright little bubbles. I sat across from him, coffee steaming in my hand, silent as stone. He finally looked up. What's with the suit? He asked, nodding at the jacket draped over my chair. I have an appointment, I replied simply. He grinned, smug as ever. Retirement home tours? You're ahead of schedule. I didn't answer. Silence makes some men nervous. It makes others arrogant. With Derek, it did both. By mid-morning, Evelyn had already set the wheels in motion. My phone buzzed with a message from her. Invitations sent. 2:00 sharp. Expect a full room. The list was deliberate. Derek, of course. Clara, because she needed to see the man she was tying herself to. Rosa Alvarez from next door, who had witnessed more of Derek's cruelty than he realized. Harold Miller, the banker who could verify records better than any sermon. A few other neighbors, just enough to keep the truth public. When Derek received his invitation, his face twisted with confusion. What's this nonsense? A will reading? Emily never had a will? I stirred my coffee, calm. There's more to her life than you knew. He jabbed a finger at me. You're bluffing. Am I? I asked. I let the question hang there, an iron weight in the air. He hated questions more than answers. Clara came over just after lunch, her perfume announcing her before the door closed. She looked at the embossed envelope in Derek's hand, curiosity bright in her eyes. What's this? Some stunt? Derek muttered. The old man's desperate. Desperate enough to call in a lawyer? She asked, her gaze flicking to me. I sipped my coffee and gave her nothing. That silence unnerved her more than any explanation. By early afternoon, the storm was gathering. Evelyn called again to confirm. The conference room was ready. Documents spread across mahogany, like weapons waiting to be drawn. Derek paced, tie loosened, voice sharp. I don't have time for this circus. You'll make time, Clara snapped, surprising both of us. If there's something in writing, I want to see it. I'm not moving into a mess. Derek froze. For the first time, a crack showed in his smooth surface. I leaned back in my chair, folded my hands, and spoke quietly. 2:00. Be there, or don't. Either way, the truth has a way of showing up. Outside, dark clouds rolled in, the kind that promised rain but held it just long enough to remind you of the weight above. It felt fitting. Storms don't announce themselves. They gather until the sky can't hold them anymore. I stood, straightened my jacket, and picked up the folder waiting by the door. The house seemed to exhale as I left, as if even its walls knew that the real battle wasn't fought with hammers or eviction notices, but with patience and proof. 2:00, I thought, as thunder rumbled faintly in the distance. That's when the storm breaks. Derek had always been loud in his victories. When his football team won, the whole block knew. When he got a new car, he revved it down Maple Street like a parade float. But that afternoon, on the way to Evelyn Harper's office, he was quiet. Too quiet. I sat in the passenger seat of his SUV, folder pressed against my knee. Clara was in the back, scrolling her phone but not smiling at the screen. She kept sneaking glances at Derek as if measuring the man she thought she knew against the one sitting in front of her. "You don't have to come," Derek told her, his jaw tight. "Yes, I do," Clara replied. "If I'm moving into this house, I deserve to know what's going on." He flinched at her choice of words. "If we hit a red light," Derek tapped the wheel, too fast, like his pulse was bleeding into plastic. His reflection in the windshield showed more than he wanted, sweat beading at his temple, lips pressed thin. "You're awfully nervous for a man who claims he owns everything," I said quietly. He snapped his head toward me. "I'm not nervous." Clara leaned forward. "Then why haven't you told me the details? All I hear is, 'Trust me, it's my house.' But when I ask about deeds or paperwork, you change the subject." Derek's hands tightened on the wheel. "Because it's complicated." "Complicated?" I repeated. "That's one word for it." Clara's eyes narrowed. "Or dishonest." The light turned green, and Derek accelerated harder than he needed to. For a moment, I thought he might drive us past Evelyn's office, straight out of town, like running from paper could erase it. But pride anchored him. Men like Derek don't retreat until the walls actually close in. We arrived 10 minutes early. Evelyn's office sat on the corner of 17th Street, glass windows gleaming, brass letters on the door. She'd chosen the conference room for a reason, big enough for witnesses, intimidating enough for truth. As we walked up the steps, Clara grabbed Derek's sleeve. "Why didn't you tell me he has an attorney?" she whispered, nodding toward me. "Because it doesn't matter," Derek said sharply. "Lawyers are just paperwork." "Funny," I said, holding the door open. "That's exactly what you're afraid of." Inside, Evelyn's assistant guided us to the long mahogany table. Already seated were Rosa Alvarez, neat as always in her pressed blouse, and Harold Miller, the banker with years of numbers etched into his face. They both greeted me warmly, which only deepened the crease in Derek's forehead. Clara noticed. She leaned close to him and whispered, but loud enough for me to catch, "Why do they know him better than they know you?" Derek didn't answer. He just pulled out a chair, sat stiff, and tried to hide the tremor in his hands. The storm was breaking, and Derek's mask was already showing cracks. The conference room smelled of lemon polish and old wood, the kind of room built for truth, whether people liked it or not. Evelyn Harper sat at the head of the mahogany table, 3 thick folders stacked in front of her like ammunition. She greeted me with a firm nod before turning her sharp eyes toward Derek and Clara. "Thank you for coming," she said smoothly, as if this were a casual neighborhood gathering. "We have important matters to settle today." Derek shifted in his chair, tapping his foot against the carpet. Clara sat straighter, her eyes darting between Evelyn's folders and my calm expression. Across the table, Rosa Alvarez folded her hands neatly, watching with quiet intensity, while Harold Miller adjusted his glasses, already sifting through numbers only he could see in his mind. Evelyn began softly. "First, let us acknowledge Emily's life. Her will is brief but meaningful. She left a few personal keepsakes to friends, her books to a local library, and—" She glanced at me, her voice lowering, "a letter of gratitude to her father." My throat tightened as Evelyn slid the letter across the table. I didn't open it. Not yet. The weight of it was enough. Derek let out a sharp breath. "That's it? A letter and some junk for the library? We wasted everyone's time for this?" Evelyn didn't flinch. She stacked the first folder aside and placed her hand on the second. "Not quite. There are other documents that need reviewing." Derek's smirk faltered. "Other documents? Emily never—" Evelyn cut him off. "Mr. Wilson, the law doesn't operate on what people assume. It operates on records, and these records suggest that the house you've been living in may not belong to you at all." The room went still. Even Clara leaned forward, eyes wide. "That's ridiculous," Derek snapped. "Emily and I bought that house in 2017. "Did you?" Evelyn asked calmly. She slid a sheet of paper across the table. Thick, official, stamped by the county recorder. "This is the warranty deed for the property. Recorded in 1998. Purchased under a holding company." Clara's hand flew to her mouth. Rosa leaned closer, whispering a prayer under her breath. "Who's the representative on that deed?" Harold asked, though he already knew. Evelyn's lips curved slightly. "Luke Anderson." I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I sat still, hands folded, letting the silence burn Derek, where arrogance once protected him. He slammed his palm on the table. "You forged this." Harold chuckled softly, pulling his own folder open. "I've handled the financials for that property for years. Payments, taxes, insurance, all linked to Luke's accounts. There's no forgery here." Clara turned to Derek, her face pale. "You told me it was yours. You told me you bought it with Emily?" Derek's mouth opened, but no sound came. For the first time since I'd known him, his words had abandoned him. Evelyn tapped the third folder, the thickest of all. "And we're just getting started." The storm had finally broken. The air in the conference room was thick enough to cut. Evelyn Harper rested her hand on the third folder, the one Derek hadn't stopped glancing at since she laid it on the table. His face was pale, his jaw tight, but his eyes betrayed something new. Fear. "We've reviewed the deed," Evelyn said, her voice steady as iron. "Now we'll examine the financial records. Harold?" Harold Miller, calm as a man who'd spent his life balancing other people's chaos, opened his briefcase. He spread out a neat stack of papers across the table. "These are 25 years of tax receipts and mortgage statements," he explained. "Every one of them paid from Luke Anderson's accounts. Not Emily's, not Derek's." He looked at Derek over the rim of his glasses. "Tell me, son, do you remember writing a single check for property taxes?" Derek swallowed hard. "Emily handled the bills. With Luke's money," Harold said firmly. Clara turned to Derek, her voice sharp. "So you never actually paid for the house? You lied to me?" "I didn't lie," Derek snapped, his voice cracking. "I just didn't tell you everything." Rosa Alvarez leaned forward, her small hands folded neatly. "We all thought Luke owned this house. You acted like a guest who stayed too long." Derek's head whipped toward her. "You don't know what you're talking about." Rosa didn't blink. "I know respect when I see it, and you never showed any." Evelyn cleared her throat, drawing every eye back to her. She opened the thick folder with deliberate care, sliding out photographs, contracts, and letters. "This is where it gets interesting. These records show Luke's career as a real estate developer. Projects across the city, commercial buildings, residential properties. A portfolio worth millions." Clara gasped. "Millions?" Derek blinked, stunned. "You're a handyman." I finally spoke, my voice low but steady. "That's what you wanted to believe. It was easier to see me as weak, as someone you could order around, but I stepped back from business by choice, not because I was broke. I worked with my hands because it kept me close to what mattered." Evelyn held up a photo of me at a ribbon cutting years ago, handshaking with the mayor, smiling in a sharp suit Derek had never seen. Luke Anderson wasn't just building cabinets. He was building half this city. The room fell into silence, the truth crashing louder than any thunder outside. Clara pushed her chair back, her voice trembling. "You let me plan a life with you, Derek, and all this time you were squatting in another man's house." Derek reached for her arm, desperate. "Clara, listen!" She yanked it away. "Don't touch me." Evelyn slid one last document across the table. A crisp eviction notice, signed and sealed. "Mr. Wilson, you gave Luke 30 days to vacate his own property. I'm afraid the law disagrees with your arrangement. Effective immediately, you are the one required to leave." The words hit harder than a hammer blow. Derek stared at the page, his lips moving but forming no sound. His empire of arrogance had collapsed in front of witnesses. I leaned forward, speaking the words he once used on me. "Most people would call 7 years of free housing pretty generous." Clara stood abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. "I won't be part of this." She turned on her heel and walked out, leaving Derek alone in the wreckage of his pride. For the first time in a long while, I let myself breathe. The storm had passed, and all that remained was truth. The conference room had gone silent. The kind of silence that hangs after thunder has rolled past and left everyone stunned. Derek sat slumped in his chair, the eviction notice trembling in his hands. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Evelyn Harper tapped her pen against the table once, firm and deliberate. "Mr. Wilson, as of this moment, you have 30 days to vacate the premises. The same courtesy you extended to Luke." The irony stung him. His head jerked up, eyes wild. "You can't do this. That's my home." "Correction," Evelyn said smoothly. "It is Luke Anderson's property, purchased, maintained, and paid for entirely by him. You, Mr. Wilson, have been a guest, and now your invitation is revoked." Clara, who had paused near the door, let out a sharp laugh, bitter, hollow. "You made me believe you owned everything. Turns out you owned nothing." She didn't wait for his reply. She walked out, heels clicking like gavel strikes on marble. Rosa Alvarez leaned closer, her voice low but clear enough for everyone to hear. 7 years we all thought you were grateful to Luke. Turns out we gave you too much credit. Derek's face flushed deep red. "You don't understand. Emily and I—" "Emily," I interrupted, my voice finally cutting through, "asked me to protect her pride. She didn't want anyone to know I was paying for everything. She wanted you to feel important. And how did you repay her? By throwing her father out before the ground had settled over her grave." Derek flinched as if struck. He tried to speak, but Evelyn slid another document forward. "This restraining order prevents you from tampering with Luke's property or belongings during your move. Violate it, and you'll answer to the court." His hand shook so badly the eviction notice rattled against the table. I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "You told me most people would call 7 years of free housing generous. Now I'm telling you the same. Consider this my generosity ending." The words left him hollow. For the first time, Derek looked smaller than the room around him. His arrogance had bled out, leaving only desperation. Neighbors murmured in agreement, nodding as though justice had finally stretched its legs after being kept waiting too long. Harold Miller gathered his papers with clinical precision, then patted my shoulder. "You did right by Emily, Luke. She'd be proud." Evelyn banged the table lightly with her gavel, an old habit from law school she never lost. "This meeting is adjourned." Everyone rose, chairs scraping against wood. Derek stayed seated, staring at the eviction notice as if it might catch fire and save him from reality. But the truth doesn't burn away that easily. When I walked past him toward the door, he whispered, "Where am I supposed to go?" I stopped, just for a moment, and repeated his own words back to him, calm as stone. "That's not really my problem anymore, is it?" I left him sitting there, a man who had mistaken kindness for weakness, now learning the difference the hard way. The morning after the meeting, I woke before the sun. For the first time in months, the house didn't feel heavy. The walls didn't echo with Derek's voice or the slam of his footsteps. It was just me, the creak of old wood, and the quiet hum of a refrigerator I had bought 20 years ago with cash Derek never knew existed. I brewed coffee and sat on the porch with the mug Emily once gave me for Father's Day. Bessa Dad scratched into its side by her teenage handwriting. The air was sharp, clean, and the street outside glowed with that pale blue light that only comes when night hasn't quite let go. Across the way, Rosa Alvarez waved as she carried out her trash. She didn't say anything, just smiled the kind of smile neighbors give when they know you've come through a storm. By mid-morning, people began to stop by. Mrs. Chen from the corner brought a casserole, saying softly, "Welcome home, Luke. Truly home." The Morrison couple came next with a bottle of wine. Even young Jake Peterson strummed his guitar at my gate and said, "Glad you're still here, Mr. Anderson." For years, Derek had kept us apart. He always made excuses for skipping block parties, told Emily we were too busy for community events. Now I realized why. The more people saw me, the more they'd see through him. By late afternoon, the backyard was alive with neighbors. Rosa set up a table with lemonade and her famous salsa. Frank from down the block hauled over a grill. Children chased each other through the grass where Emily had once played tag. For the first time since her funeral, laughter filled the air around this house. I stood by the garden beds, running my hands over the soil. Derek had mocked me for planting tomatoes every spring. He never understood that tending a garden isn't about produce. It's about patience, about proving to yourself that you can nurture something and watch it grow. That evening, as the fireflies began to flicker, I realized the same patience had saved me. Later, Harold Miller stopped by, holding a folder. "Luke," he said, "I don't mean to intrude on your celebration, but there's something you should see." He handed me a summary of my holdings, accounts, and properties. Numbers, neat and precise. For years I'd kept them in the shadows, living simply to honor Emily's wish that Derek's pride remain intact. But now the truth was open, and the weight of secrecy was gone. "Looks like you're worth more than most folks around here realized," Harold said with a grin. "Worth isn't measured in dollars," I replied, tucking the folder under my arm, "but it helps when it keeps a roof over your head." As neighbors clapped me on the back, offering congratulations, I felt something shift. I wasn't just surviving Derek's cruelty anymore. I was rebuilding. That night, I sat in Emily's room with the window cracked open. The photo album I'd saved from the dumpster lay on her desk, pages open to her first day of college. I whispered into the still air, "You told me not to let anyone erase you. I didn't, and I won't." Outside, the wind carried the soft ring of Rosa's chimes. The storm had passed. A new dawn was here. 3 months passed. The seasons shifted, and the house began to feel less like a mausoleum and more like a home again. I had repainted the kitchen, not because it needed it, but because I wanted the place to smell of fresh beginnings instead of stale grief. Emily's photos still hung in the hallway, but now they stood as tributes, not reminders of what Derek had tried to erase. On a gray Monday morning, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, Derek stood there. He looked thinner, the sharpness of arrogance ground down to stubble and tired eyes. He held his hands clasped in front of him like a man waiting for judgment. "Luke," he said softly, "I hope it's all right I came by." I stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind me. Old habits. The house was mine, but I wasn't about to let him track his chaos across its floors. "It's your right to ring the bell," I said evenly, "but coming in? That requires an invitation you don't have." He nodded, taking the words like he expected them. "Fair." We stood on the porch, the winter air biting between us. Finally he spoke. "I've been living in Grand Junction with my mother. Got a job at a smaller insurance firm. Less money, but more honest work." I didn't respond. It wasn't my role to console him. "I started seeing a therapist," he continued. "She helped me see things I didn't want to. That I was so afraid of being a failure that I convinced myself I was entitled to success, even if it wasn't mine." His eyes flicked to the ground. "I know I hurt you. I know I betrayed Emily. I can't take that back, but I needed to say it out loud." I studied him. The arrogance was gone, but wounds run deeper than apologies. "Words are easier than actions," I said. He nodded. "I know. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Not yet. Just a chance to show I'm trying to be better." A car pulled into the driveway. Evelyn Harper stepped out, briefcase in hand, arriving for our weekly meeting about the affordable housing project I'd agreed to consult on. She gave Derek a curt nod, but nothing more. "I should let you get to your business," Derek said, stepping back. Then he hesitated. Would it be all right if I sent you a card on Emily's birthday, just to let you know I'm thinking about her?" I took a long breath, feeling the weight of what forgiveness truly means. Finally, I said, "That would be fine, but don't expect me to send one back. Forgiveness is a process, not a gift you unwrap in one sitting." Relief flickered across his face. "Thank you. That's more than I deserve." He turned, walking down the path toward his car. Oh, before getting in, he looked back one last time. For what it's worth, Luke, you raised an incredible daughter. She loved you more than anything. Then he was gone. Inside, Evelyn spread out blueprints for the new project across my dining room table. I leaned over the plans, pencil in hand, and realized something important. My life wasn't just about protecting the past anymore. It was about building again, stronger, clearer, and with boundaries that no one would ever cross without consequence. That night, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset burn orange over the rooftops, I thought of Emily. I had honored her memory by standing my ground, but I had also honored myself by refusing to be erased. The lesson was clear. Kindness is not weakness. Boundaries aren't cruelty, they're survival. And those who mistake one for the other eventually learn the cost. The wind chime rang softly as if Emily agreed.